Scattered across the southern region of Ohio are several remote emerald green towns. Most of the residents here are devout Christians. They firmly believe that God will resolve all the suffering in the world and in life. Yet for decades, this desolate land has remained filled with depravity, sin, and darkness. Truly, a land of wonders in the most ironic sense. In the 1940s, American soldier Willard, who hailed from this wondrous land, witnessed a horrific scene after a battle. A comrade of his was captured by the enemy, skinned alive and nailed to a cross, barely clinging to life. Willard, unable to bear seeing his friend suffer, ended his pain with a bullet. From that moment on, Willard, who had followed his mother in believing in Christianity since childhood, fell into deep doubt about his faith. He couldn't understand. If God truly exists, how could he allow such cruelty to happen? After the war, Willard returned home alive by sheer luck. While passing through a small town, he met a kind and gentle waitress named Charlotte. It was love at first sight, and they quickly married. With the blessing of Willard's mother, Emma, the couple settled in Charlotte's hometown. Soon after, they had a son named Arvin and lived a peaceful and warm life. But happiness was short-lived. When Arvin turned 9, Charlotte was diagnosed with cancer. At the time, with medical care still underdeveloped, a cancer diagnosis was a death sentence. Helpless, Willard turned back to faith and prayed to God. He built a simple wooden cross in the hills behind their home and brought Arvin to kneel before it every day, praying for a miracle to save his wife. But no miracle came. Charlotte continued to weaken by the day. Willard thought his prayers had gone unheard because he wasn't devout enough. To show his sincerity to God, he descended into a growing frenzy and decided to offer a sacrifice. Ignoring Arvin's pleas and cries, Willard killed the family-beloved dog and nailed its body to the cross behind their house. Yet even this sacrifice failed. Charlotte eventually died from cancer spreading through her body. Her death shattered Willard's faith completely. He took his own life in front of the cross, a final act of rebellion against God. With both parents gone, 9-year-old Arvin was left all alone. The local sheriff Lee took him to live with his grandmother Emma, who resided even farther away in a more remote emerald town called Coal Creek. Living with them were Emma's brother, Arvin's great-uncle, and her adopted granddaughter, Lenora. The story of Emma and Lenora dates back 10 years. At that time, Willard had just returned from war. Emma had hoped to match him with Helen, the godly girl next door. Coal Creek's residents were deeply religious, and both Emma and Helen were among the most devout. Their relationship was close, so Emma hoped Helen could become her daughter-in-law. But Willard had already fallen for Charlotte at first sight, and Helen, too, had someone she loved. So the two never became a couple. Each went on to start their own families. 2 years after Arvin was born to Willard and Charlotte, Helen and her husband had a daughter named Lenora. Helen's husband, Roy, was a fanatical preacher. To prove that God protected the faithful, he often placed poisonous spiders on his head during sermons. Perhaps by luck, he had never been bitten. But when Lenora was just 8 months old, Roy's luck ran out. During one sermon, as expected, he was bitten by a venomous spider. Though the venom wasn't strong and he quickly recovered, Roy became convinced that God had forsaken him. He locked himself in a dark basement, repeating prayers in hopes of regaining God's favor. Roy had a disabled younger brother, Theodore, who relied entirely on him to live. Since marrying Helen, Roy had neglected his brother, so Theodore harbored deep resentment toward Helen. To eliminate her, he began brainwashing his brother in God's name. He claimed the spider bite was merely a test from God, and that Roy had now passed. As a reward, Roy had been granted the power to resurrect his wife. If fate proved unfortunate, he could use his wife for an experimental resurrection. The slow-witted Roy took his brother's words at face value. He then lied to his wife, Helen, saying he wanted to take her on a relaxing outing. Helen naturally welcomed the idea. Before leaving, she entrusted their infant daughter, still in a cradle, to Emma, their next-door neighbor, to look after. The two brothers, Roy and Theodore, drove Helen deep into a remote forest. While walking together, Roy suddenly stabbed a screwdriver into Helen's neck and died from her severe injuries. Roy immediately dropped to his knees, praying fervently, pleading with God to resurrect his wife. But the miracle never came. Only then did Roy realize he had committed a terrible mistake. Panicked, he abandoned his crippled brother Theodore in the woods and hitched a ride from a passing car to begin his escape. What Roy never expected was that the couple offering him a ride were sadistic perverts with a twisted fetish. The wife, known as Sandy, enjoyed using her looks to seduce men they encountered along the road. Her husband Carl was obsessed with photographing his wife in intimate situations with strangers, a practice the couple viewed as an art form. Though mentally slow, Roy was not lustful, and he firmly rejected Sandy's advances. In response, the couple tortured him to death. During the murder, the couple experienced a thrill unlike anything before. From that moment on, killing became their new twisted hobby. Roy's body was eventually found by local police. His brother Theodore, now completely alone and helpless, chose to end his life. Their daughter Lenora, less than a year old, was then naturally taken in and raised by Emma and her brother. She became Emma's adopted granddaughter. When 9-year-old Arvin arrived at his grandmother and great-uncle's home, Lenora had just turned 7. Arvin was very fond of his younger, unrelated sister. Under the careful upbringing of Emma and her brother, the two siblings gradually grew up together. Time flew by. 9 years passed. Arvin had become a young adult, and 16-year-old Lenora was blossoming into a graceful and elegant young woman. During their high school years, 3 local bullies often harassed Lenora. Arvin never hesitated to defend her, even though he was frequently outnumbered and beaten black and blue. Still, Arvin never backed down. As graduation approached, he worried that once he left school, the bullies would torment his sister even more. So he took advantage of a moment when the 3 were separated and beat each of them into submission one by one. After that well-deserved thrashing, the bullies never dared lay a hand on Lenora again. What Arvin didn't expect was that, on the same day he taught those bullies a lesson, Lenora was assaulted by a predatory pastor named Preston. That day, Lenora had gone alone to the graveyard behind the church to visit her mother's grave. Normally, Arvin would accompany her, but he had been busy dealing with the bullies. Left on her own, Lenora caught the eye of Preston. He was outwardly handsome, like a fresh-faced movie star, but in truth, a depraved hypocrite, a man full of pious talk and vile intentions. Preston drove Lenora to a remote wooded area and, under the pretense of divine will, manipulated her into intimacy. Having grown up under Emma's influence, Lenora was a devout Christian. She naively believed Preston's holy-sounding lies. Not only did she lose her innocence, but she also became pregnant with his child. By the time she realized she was expecting, 2 months had passed. Despite severe morning sickness, she didn't dare tell her grandmother, great-uncle, or Arvin. Instead, she secretly sought out the predator pastor to discuss what to do. To her horror, Preston refused to acknowledge the child as his and demanded she deal with it on her own, suggesting she terminate the pregnancy. He warned that if the matter got out, it would bring shame to her entire family, including Emma. Lenora, overwhelmed and terrified by his threats, fell into despair and considered taking her own life. But as she stood at the edge, she suddenly hesitated, realizing that her grandmother, great-uncle, and brother all truly loved her. They would surely forgive her and help take care of the baby. Just as she was about to step back, she slipped, and what should have been a second chance turned into a fatal accident. By the time Emma, Arvin, and their great-uncle returned home, the 3 were devastated, unable to comprehend why she would leave them so suddenly. It wasn't until the coroner examined the body and discovered she was pregnant that the truth finally came to light. Arvin, who had spent nearly every moment with Lenora, understood her deeply. He quickly suspected that she had likely been assaulted by the new pastor, Preston, during her visit to her mother's grave behind the church. To confirm his suspicion, Arvin began secretly following Preston. It wasn't long before he uncovered the horrific truth. Preston frequently lured young female parishioners into the woods to satisfy his vile desires. During the 2 weeks Arvin shadowed him, he witnessed 3 more innocent girls fall victim to Preston's predation. Clearly, Lenora had been one of them. Racked with rage and grief, Arvin resolved to kill Preston, not just for Lenora, but to rid the town of this monster. Unlike Lenora, Arvin had grown up witnessing the failures of blind faith. He never believed in God's protection or punishment. To avenge Lenora, he had to take matters into his own hands and kill the beast that was Preston once and for all. At dawn, Arvin left a letter for his grandmother and great-uncle explaining everything. Then, taking the pistol his father had left from his military service, he headed to the church alone. At that time, the church was empty, except for Pastor Preston. Faced with Arvin's gun, Preston confessed everything, luring female parishioners, driving Lenora to her death. Consumed by righteous fury, Arvin pulled the trigger and ended Preston's wretched life. After the killing, Arvin decided to return to the town where his parents had once lived, to bury the remains of the family dog that his father had once sacrificed, and finally lay the past to rest. On his way out of Coal Creek Town, he flagged down a passing rideshare. By coincidence, the driver was none other than the twisted couple, Carl and Sandy, the same people who had murdered Lenora's father, Roy. Over the years, Carl had continued his grotesque lifestyle, photographing his wife with strangers and killing for pleasure. Midway through the journey, Carl claimed he needed to use the bathroom and instructed his wife to drive the car into a remote forest. He stepped out pretending to leave to give Sandy a chance to seduce Arvin. But Sandy, long tired of the endless cycle of bloodshed, hesitated. She considered making up an excuse to let Arvin go. At that moment, the impatient and volatile Carl, seeing his wife fail to act, rushed back with a handgun to force Arvin into submission. But before he could say a word, Arvin drew his own weapon and shot him dead. Arvin had been suspicious of the couple from the start, their odd behavior, their eerie energy. Earlier, he had even glimpsed a pistol tucked at Carl's waist. That's when Arvin made up his mind. He would strike first. Sandy, panicked by her husband's sudden death, pulled her gun and opened fire on Arvin. The two exchanged shots, but in the end, Sandy was also killed. Arvin remained unscathed. His survival wasn't luck or plot armor. Carl had long suspected that his wife might betray him someday. To keep control, he had secretly replaced the bullets in her gun with blanks. That decision cost Sandy her life and saved Arvin's. After killing the murderous couple, Arvin searched their bodies and took their cash. Inside Carl's wallet, he made a chilling discovery: a photo of Roy's murder. Roy had been their first victim, so they had kept his photo as a souvenir. In the car, Arvin also found 2 rolls of film containing graphic photos of the couple torturing and murdering other victims. Realizing that he had just killed 2 serial killers by sheer accident, Arvin felt his guilt dissolve completely. With hard evidence in hand, he left the scene and, after a long journey, returned to the town where his parents once lived. There, on the hill behind the house, his father Willard's handmade wooden cross still stood. The dog once sacrificed was now reduced to scattered white bones on the ground. Just as Arvin was preparing to bury them, Sheriff Lee, the very man who had sent him to Emma all those years ago, suddenly appeared. This time, Sheriff Lee was holding a loaded shotgun, and he was there to kill Arvin. Fortunately, Arvin managed to dodge behind a tree just in time, avoiding the first blast of pellets. It turned out that the serial killer, Sandy, whom Arvin had just killed, was actually Sheriff Lee's own sister. Sheriff Lee himself was a deeply corrupt man, not only taking bribes and stealing, but also protecting and covering up for the crimes of his sister and brother-in-law. That's why the murderous couple had gone unpunished for so long, before finally being gunned down by Arvin. The day before, Sheriff Lee received a report confirming that his sister and brother-in-law had been shot to death. At almost the exact same time, the Coal Creek Town Police heard from witnesses that Pastor Preston had also been murdered, and the killer was Arvin. The police called Sheriff Lee, asking him to assist in arresting Arvin. Given that both the pastor and Lee's sister and brother-in-law had been killed with the same model handgun, Sheriff Lee easily deduced that Arvin was behind it all. So he went alone, armed and seeking revenge. Arvin, confused and alarmed by the sudden attack, tried to ask why the sheriff wanted to kill him. But Lee was there to kill, not to talk. In self-defense, Arvin had no choice but to return fire. And thanks to his protagonist halo, he shot and killed Sheriff Lee. Afterward, Arvin took the pistol that had claimed 4 lives and buried it in the ground, along with the white bones of his childhood dog. Then he walked to the side of the highway, flagged down a passing ride, and left this wondrous land behind. This story is from the 2020 film The Devil All the Time, a Hollywood crime thriller based on the American novel of the same name. Though set over half a century ago in a fictional town in southern Ohio, its themes seem to mirror a graying era where the people are gradually losing faith and divine protection. In this God-forsaken age, not only have morals collapsed, but life has become precariously cheap. One misstep and ordinary people are crushed to pieces. For the wealthy elite, this might just seem like alarmist metaphor, but for those suffering in darkness, it may well reflect reality itself.